Welcome back to the Arcane Forge. My name's Josh. Today I'm going to talk about how to make a really interesting character for your role-playing campaign. Before we get started, if you like this video, make sure to leave it a little thumbs up and also subscribe for more videos like this every week. Anyway, back to the video. So sometimes it's tough to make a character that is memorable and interesting to play. Maybe you'll go to your games night and night after night you see one of your friends playing this amazing character and you think, why can't I come up with someone like that? Someone that we're going to be talking about for years down the line about how fantastic a moment they might have had or what they would say in this situation, because they really feel like they're fleshed out, they're living and breathing, and you kind of know their personality instantly. So the first part of that is to think about what you actually find interesting in a character. Think about characters from TV or movies or from games or books that you've read that you've been really enthralled with, characters that you found really memorable. Largely, I bet they're not going to be the main character. Not always, but sometimes. That's because usually the main character, the protagonist in a story, is used for us to kind of sit in, use as a vehicle to discover the world, maybe project some of our own thoughts and opinions onto them, and make that story a little bit more accessible for us. We imprint ourselves onto them, and that's usually because they end up being a little bit more of a blank slate. But their supporting cast, by definition, usually serve some kind of character arc. They serve something to the plot or to the story, and they usually have really wildly defining character traits. Automatically, my mind comes up with The Witcher, one of my favourite games ever. I think it's probably actually my favourite game that I've ever played. It's wonderfully written, all the characters are fantastic, even the books are, brilliant. But when you think of the character Geralt, the main character, he's kind of gruff, and he's edgy, and he's skilled, he's exciting, and he has loads of rich depth and intricacy to his character. But he's been designed with one thing in mind. His code means that he can't particularly act in one way or another. He can't be super evil, he can't be super good, he picks up contracts, and what that means is anyone can be him. He is a vehicle for you to land into and act through your own decisions. It won't break the plot entirely if you choose to do something good or something bad, but ultimately, Geralt is supposed to be super neutral. He doesn't talk much, so we can put our own thoughts into his mind and say what we might want to say through him. He's a perfect way for us to explore a world. But that doesn't translate very well to a role-playing campaign, where you are your thoughts and feelings and your actions and so on. You can't afford to be quiet if you want to make a really memorable character that kind of jumps out of the box a little bit. But you only have to look as far as his supporting cast to see characters that really wildly differ from this. Think of Dandelion, for example. A really charismatic, super flawed character. He's really selfish, he's really charming, he never shuts up, and he's not really good at anything. I mean, he can throw a few words together and make a fantastic poem, but he screws up and his character develops. That brings me on neatly to point 2, which is that your character has to have flaws. If they're going to be interesting, they have to be bad at something. In fact, the more interesting characters tend to be worse at more stuff. The thing we want to avoid is creating a Mary Sue. Someone who always seems to do well, someone who has no imperfection, has nothing for us to grip onto and understand. No one's like a cardboard cutout of one virtue or one flaw. Everyone's built up of loads of different layers. We can hold two completely conflicting ideals in our heads and still somehow go out into the world and function. You can't be precious about your character. Basically. My favourite character that I've ever personally played was a charming rogue whose defining character trait was that he was useless at pretty much everything, but he built himself up to be a fantastic adventurer. He dressed the part, he acted the part, and he had a massive charisma stat, so he could bluff his way out of pretty much everything and convince everyone that he was some sort of fantastic hero. Think Gilderoy Lockhart from the Harry Potter series, and you're on the right track. They may not be accomplishing all the deeds and feats, but they're advancing the story in a really interesting way, and you'll always remember them. So what kind of flaws might you have? You might have a phobia of something. Even Indiana Jones is afraid of snakes. Maybe you had some sort of traumatic event happen to you in your childhood, and you're terrified of something related to it ever since. Maybe you were captured by a witch when you were younger, and forevermore you're terrified of everything magical, even magical weapons that would really, really give your character a boost. You just can't go near them. Maybe you stink. Maybe you're an alcoholic and you smell of the whiskey that you drink every single night to get through some kind of traumatic problem. Maybe you never wash. You're a druid. None of the animals that you grew up with washed, so why would you? Do you wear a little bit too much aftershave? A little bit too much perfume? Maybe you eat a particular kind of food every single day and You give off a faint smell of it all the time. You can be super absent-minded. One of the best characters that I've ever had in a campaign that I've run, absolutely no memory. He was terribly forgetful. And so every time you would talk to a new non-player character, you would forget their name instantly, leading to a load of humorous results. And even we built that further into his character, saying that he had amnesia. He was once a really powerful wizard, but he had forgotten all of his magic. And little by little over time, his character arc was learning once again how to build up his power. Maybe your character is really bigoted against one of the other species in your universe. They can have a beautiful character arc where they eventually learn to trust that species over time. Think of Gimli and Legolas in The Lord of the Rings, two species which utterly hate each other, or at least don't like the way each other act. And over time they become the most fantastic, bromance of them all. Maybe your character's illiterate. They're really embarrassed about it and they don't want anybody else to know. They'll hide it at all costs. It's a nice vulnerability, a nice way to access that character. Certainly if you also add on top of that really pretentious, putting on this big front about being super superior, and they have this vulnerability that's all just to mask that vulnerability. What if they're really naive? A lawful good character, for example, a paladin who just wants to get on with absolutely everyone. Even though the orcs are charging at them with a huge battle axes in their hands, screaming for blood, he'll wade into combat and first off say, "Hi friends, how's it going?" just to see if he can get the best out of someone, before violence inevitably has to ensue. Maybe a DM will pick on it, and you'll actually make some allies out of people that you wouldn't expect. If you play with a party that's really, really into taking their time, and sometimes you just want to progress the story a little bit more, that's cool. Make a hot-headed character who runs headlong into trouble. Everybody else has to run after them to kind of pick up after them when they inevitably set off every trap in the whole building. But the key to that one is to develop a character's personality over their power. What they can do in the game is great and it's fun and it's empowering. But if you want to make a great character, that's got to be second fiddle to what their personality is actually like. I often think about who I want to play before I even think about what class they would fit. On the note of power, role-playing games, and specifically Dungeons & Dragons, has one thing in mind, and it's not about being powerful. It's about a journey. When you're making a level 1 character, you're not making Conan the Barbarian, you're making Dave, just some guy who has decided that they're going to be an adventurer or they're going to go on a quest. They're more like Frodo Baggins at the beginning of The Lord of the Rings. They don't really know what they're doing. They have the equipment and maybe they've read a book on what they should be doing, but they're not Captain Ultra Hero, already skilled and proficient in everything. They're not already a badass. This story is their journey on how they become that. And you might have to accept things that won't go at all like you planned them. Now, a DM will always try and accommodate you in a story, but if things don't end up that way, you've got to be adaptable and accept the fact that you started off with a level 1 character who is going to become this supreme badass, who's going to become this really powerful character only at the very end of the story. We don't start off with Geralt of Rivia, we start off with Geralt the trainee witcher who's going through the trial of grasses. Not that your character didn't have a life before this. Try and think about what motivated them to set themselves onto this path. What were they doing before? Were they once powerful and now they're not? Do they have allies and friends somewhere else, or maybe some enemies that they've made along the way? Do they have a rival? Maybe they have some kind of connection, relationship, or something like that to some of the other player characters. You might want to discuss with your game master or with some of the other players how your idea for a character might fit in with theirs, and maybe you've at least met or heard of each other or something like that. But it can really cement a group together if some of you already know each other somehow. Maybe you don't know each other, but you have some kind of relationship to each other. Maybe the rogue, the aspiring assassin, went on one job to enter into the Assassin's Guild, and they killed a wealthy businessman. They didn't do a particularly great job because they're level 1, but they still managed to do it, and they're still in the guild now. Little do they know that the person that they were hired to kill was actually the parent of one of the other player characters, and their parent dying was the driving force for the reason why they started on their adventure in the first place, to discover who did it. They may not find out that they actually were searching for each other the whole time until the very, very end. Avoid the archetypal tragic backstory. My parents died and now I'm trying to avenge them. It seems like every time you start an early D&D campaign, maybe your first one, and you describe each other's backstories, there's going to be a litany of destruction and death. Everyone's family has completely been eradicated from the earth. Everyone that I've ever known and loved has been expunged from existence. Knowing that that's something common that's going to be picked very often, you can instead subvert that and say you have a loving family, you have friends. They're not captured, they're not kept in the tower, you don't need to rescue the princess. This might literally just be your job. You want to go out and make some gold so that you can come home and feed them all. Maybe you're really competitive with your spouse and they're earning more than you, and this is the only way that you can think to earn loads of money quickly, to re-establish your dominance in that weird household. That's an interesting insecurity and could also make for some really fun characters to introduce. What if that character's partner is also an adventurer but just really successful and you've all heard of who they are? They're just trying to live up to that example. What if your character's parents are alive and well, but they just really want you to get out more? So they signed you up to the Adventurers Guild, and that's how this party formed itself. What if you were just Colin, the elven accountant, for so many years, so many hundreds of years, that you just needed some adventure? You're having a midlife elven crisis, and you need to get out there and slay some goblins. My point is that not all backstories need to be tragic to motivate a hero to go and do some stuff. Give your character some kind of aim, something that only they want to achieve, something that they maybe don't tell the party about originally. You get a quest and a story to follow as part of this group, but you also have something that you want to achieve yourself. You've been given puzzle books and treasure maps from a really early age, and you're desperate to find the lost treasure of Atlantis or something like that, who knows? Any little rumour or something that sounds related to it, and you'll immediately be very distracted from the main plot, the main story, and run off and go and do that other thing. Another way to make your character really distinct and interesting is to give them a voice. How do they speak? How do they sound? What kind of words do they use? Whereas most people in this world might speak like you or I, maybe your character is somehow hundreds or thousands of years old. Maybe they speak an ancient dialect of the common language, and they might be the person charging into battle saying, "Verily, have at thee, brigand!" Are there distant locations in this world? In which case you might have some kind of accent. You might not sound like just about everybody else in the party. But who knows, some kind of inflection added to your voice might add something to it. It might change the personality of your voice a little bit. It does not have to be perfect, but what if it makes you sound a little bit more memorable? You might find it actually makes it a little bit easier for you to jump in and out of character. Like putting on someone else's clothes, I suppose. If you change your accent just a little bit, it might be a lot easier. When I'm coming up with new NPCs, I always give them some kind of accent, just so I can remember who they are. Now, it might be easier for you to come up with something like that, like an accent, rather than coming up with a load of words that you need to remember to put into your speech every time you're speaking. Just remember, it doesn't have to be perfect, just so long as you find it interesting, and so long as it defines your character. It's a good idea as well to think about what you might look like. Go beyond just, they have dark hair and dark eyes and they're a medium build. Do they wear a particular hairstyle? Do they change their hair colour every week? Maybe they shave one side of their head. Maybe they have no eyebrows. Maybe they've got a few interesting scars that tell a story. Or maybe your character claims that they tell a story, but really they're just from working in a kitchen for too long, and he just wants to sound a little bit more brave than he really is. Maybe their clothes are really interesting. Maybe they will only wear the most fashionable clothes at the time. Maybe they have one iconic item of clothing that they never take off, like a hat or something like that, an eye patch, a huge wrestling belt that they got from somewhere, but as soon as you see it, you know it's theirs. What do they walk like? Do they hobble and shamble? Do they drag their foot behind them? Do they walk at a brisk pace? Are they constantly doing the man on a mission walk? Are they quite jaunty? Do they hop and skip? Maybe they drag their heels as they walk because they're not super enthusiastic about what they have to do. How do they stand? What does their body language say about them? Do they hunch and lurch over things? Do they stand tall and proud? A good way to think about this is using a silhouette test. Try and look online at some of the most interesting characters that you can think of from TV and movies, definitely from computer games. Look at the concept art behind these characters, and you'll find if they were entirely blacked out and they were just a silhouette, you might still be able to define who's who. They might be wearing something really distinctive that cuts straight through this silhouette so you can tell them a mile off, or they might be standing in a particular way that just speaks to absolutely being them. Think about the shapes in the head and the body. Usually we tend to think of everything being quite blocky or made up of a load of ovals, very clear shapes that can make a very generic character. But try and think more angular. Maybe your necromancer has a long beak on his nose instead. He's entirely bald, and he really likes to wear a lot of fur, and in the end he looks like some sort of necrotic vulture. The barbarian might have really short legs by comparison to the rest of his body and carry all of his weight up on the top half. He's definitely skipped leg day. The wizard might have a protruding jaw that sticks out just a little bit and gives them a very regal look. But to summarise, if you want to make a really interesting character, prioritise their personality over what they can do. Flaws are often way more more interesting than perfections and can really generate a fantastic character. Try and play a supporting cast character and not the main protagonist, because they're always more interesting. And try and think about their silhouette, because no two people are going to look exactly the same from a distance. Try and play around with some of the shapes that make up their body, and keep a really strong visual in your mind of how they might hold themselves and how they might talk. Give them an accent and let it speak to their personality. Anywho guys, I hope you found this video helpful and useful. If you did, make sure to leave us a like and subscribe for more videos like this. Maybe share it with the rest of your party and see if next time around this might help them come up with a character that they're more happy with. Who knows? Next time you might be spoiled for choice when it comes to deciding who is the most interesting character, what was the most interesting moment that they did in that last adventure you had, and hopefully you'll be talking about them for years. Until next time, I'll see you later.